Chapter 11, The Return of Ulysses. Now, you know Ulysses by his Greek name. This is the Roman name for Ulysses. His name is Odysseus, and some of you know that when Odysseus got home from the Trojan War, which took him an awfully long time, do you remember? When he got home, to his kingdom of Ithaca, he found his palace, his toad hall, overrun, not by ferrets, stoats, and weasels, but by other kings who wanted to take over his kingdom and marry his wife, Penelope. Do you remember? I don't know if we got to that story this year in KX. Anyway, and the idea was that this title is a reference or making a connection to that story of Odysseus coming home after being away for a long time and having to clear his palace out, because Odysseus did. In fact, Odysseus had a challenge. He had a bow, like a bow and arrow, so a bow that only he could string, which is to say only he could put the arrow on it and pull it back, because it was so difficult to do. And when he did it, he challenged everyone to do it. No, he had his wife, Penelope, challenge the other kings to do it. And at this point, the kings did not know that Odysseus had returned. And they all tried and they couldn't do it. And then suddenly this strange looking man with no one recognized was able to pick up the king's bow and string it and pull it. And guess who it was? When it began to grow dark, they all assembled in Rat's parlor, and Rat gave each one his sword and pistols. But Badger just laughed good-humoredly, so sort of cheerfully. "I'm going to do all I've got to do with this here stick," he said. So as I told you before, lots of guns and swords. This was the way of fighting back in these days and sporting. When they were ready, Badger took a lantern and led them along by the river and then into a hole in the riverbank. Mole and Rat followed silently, but when it came to Toad's turn, of course, he managed to slip and fell into the water. He was hauled out by his friends, but Badger was very cross. Trying to sneak up on someone, do you want to make lots of noise? You lose what they call the element of surprise. Just like the story I was telling you earlier with Odysseus. He didn't reveal himself to everyone in his castle because he didn't want, he would be really outnumbered because there was a lot of them and only one of him. And he kept that surprise. Shh, it's a Maya. A little while later, they were creeping along the secret passage, which was dark and cold and damp. Toad was hurrying to keep up with the others when he bumped into Rat, who bumped into Mole, who fell over. Oh, Mole. Badger thought they were being attacked from behind, and he nearly shot Toad with his pistol. Another good reason not to play with guns, yes? You can poke out each other's eyes with the swords, too. After that, Rat kept a firm grip on Toad's shoulder to keep him out of trouble, and so they groped and shuffled along the secret passage until they came to a trapdoor. Badger said, "Now, boys, all together." They found themselves to the pantry with only a door between them and the banqueting hall. They could hear the weasels cheering and singing. Badger cried, "Follow me!" and he flung the door open wide. Do you think they kept the element of surprise? He looks awfully surprised. My, what a squealing and a squeaking and a screeching filled the air. Well, they were having a banquet. You don't expect this to happen when you're having a banquet in someone else's house. Well, maybe if it's someone else's house that you took over in an unfriendly way. Mole had gone outside to deal with the sentries, so the guards, the ones that are posted outside. "It's all over," he reported back. They had been expecting an attack from outside, but as soon as they heard the shrieks and yells inside the hall, they threw down their rifles and fled. They've all disappeared by now, and I've got their rifles. And so the four friends sat down to a great supper of chicken and jelly and trifle. Trifle is a dessert, a very English dessert, kind of layers of sweetness, cake and fruit and cream. Next day, Badger told Toad that he must hold a banquet to celebrate, lots of banquets, and that he should write the invitations himself. Oh, look at that. He has a good grip there. You see? While the others were out, Toad did as he was told, but he also included a program. Look at the way they spelled program, by the way. In American English, we spell it generally with one M, but a very English way of spelling it is with double M and an E. He also included a program for the banquet, so sort of like an order, what was going to happen, a schedule. This was be full of boastful speeches and songs by Toad, all about Toad. Are we surprised? He gave the letters to one of the weasels, I guess one of the weasels stuck around, to post or take to the post office. When Badger, Rat, and Mole came back, they eyed Toad with a good deal of suspicion. They had met the weasel carrying Toad's invitations and had taken them all off him. So that note didn't get very far. No speeches and no songs, said Rat firmly. You know you must turn over a new leaf. That's an expression to say you should start doing things a different way. And now is the time to begin. So they have enough of his toady adventures and speeches and hijinks. Toad thought for a while. Eventually he said, all right, I won't boast anymore. From now on, I will be a very different Toad. You will never have to blush for me again or be embarrassed by him. But oh dear, this is a hard world. Toad went up to his bedroom. At first, he was very sad. Then he began to smile. He locked the door, drew the curtains, which is to say, closed the curtains, arranged all the chairs in a semicircle, and sang his boastful song, so the song that brags about himself, very loudly to the empty chairs. After that, he felt better. I wonder what kind of song Toad would write about himself. There's a challenge for you, KX. At last, the hour for the banquet began to draw near, and while Toad was still making a speech to his empty bedroom, the first of the animals began to arrive. They were all dressed up in best suits. Upstairs, Toad finished off his speech with a flourish and a bow to the vacant chairs. Vacant means empty. Then he heaved a deep sigh, a long, long, long sigh. 3 longs, 1, 2, 3. Then he straightened his bow tie, adjusted his jacket, then put a gracefully modest, so not boastful, the opposite of boastful, modest expression on his face. He went downstairs to welcome all the guests to the banquet. The animals cheered when he entered and congratulated him, but Toad only smiled faintly and murmured, not at all. Not at all. He was indeed an altered Toad. After all this excitement, the 4 animals continued to be friends. They would often take a stroll together in the wild wood, and it was pleasing to see how the mother weasels would bring out their young ones and point them out. There goes the great Mr. Toad, and the gallant Water Rat, and the famous Mr. Mole, they would say. And when their children were naughty, they would tell them that the terrible Gray Badger, is he really terrible, would come and get them if they didn't behave themselves, which was a little unfair on Badger, because he was rather fond of children, but it never failed. And that's the end. You know what, KX, if you enjoy this story, the adventures of In the Wind and the Willows, there is actually a sequel. Not as good as this, but interesting. I hope you enjoyed it.